Welcome to Feed Your Wild, an immersive journey to help you remember your own medicine and awaken your intuitive healing gifts. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join us for heart-centered, real conversations exploring intuition and spirituality, health and wellness, astrology, herbalism, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and life. Our mission is to inspire, empower you, and help you expand your spiritual and intuitive connection to its fullest expression so that we can build a more beautiful world together. Get ready to feed all parts of your wild self. Hello, welcome to the Feed Your Wild podcast. I am Vanessa Rodriguez, your intuitive healing guide and host this episode and every episode. And we are here helping healers expand your intuition, align to soul calling, and cultivating freedom in your life. And today is our 300th episode. Episode number 300. I cannot believe we are here. It's been quite a ride. And I remember starting this podcast and looking at other people who had, hundreds of episodes and getting into the 300s and beyond. And I just couldn't imagine where I would be with this podcast at that point, if I would even get to 100 episodes. And well, here we are. And I am so grateful. This podcast, this community has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. And so, geez, thank you. Thank you for tuning in, for listening. Obviously, I would not be here if it was not for you. I do this for you. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Before we dive fully into this episode, I want to announce that next week on the Gemini new moon, June 6th, I have a special masterclass that you are officially invited to, and it's called the Flow and Freedom Formula, the 3 keys to breaking free from the broke healer paradigm and go from struggling and overwhelmed to expanding your wealth, your time, and importantly, your impact. In this masterclass, I'm going to share the exact components that we need as we move into the Aquarian Age to cultivate more flow, as in energetic flow, flow in our work, flow in our intuition, flow in our business, and of course, cash flow, and more freedom, location freedom, time freedom, freedom that comes from being well-resourced. How to cultivate these things. What are the essential pieces when it comes specifically to healers and intuitive healers at that. This is based off of deep market research that I did over the past couple of years, as well as my 12 years in the online space and working very closely with wealth consciousness guides, mentors, thought leaders, and of course, my own experience and experiment through trial and error with my own money programs and wealth consciousness. I'll be sharing a bit of that here today for you in this episode, but I'm going much deeper and much more specific and with tangible steps that you can take right away in your journey. That is in our masterclass next Thursday. It is going to be live, but sign up even if you can't make it live, or if you're tuning in from the future. Hello, future person. We are going to have a replay available to you, so sign up. The link is in the show notes. You can also go to wildlyrooted.com/break free, one word, and sign up right away, right now. Pause this podcast episode and sign up for the masterclass, because you're going to want to tune in. I'm going to be sharing not only some practical steps, but also a one-stop shop solution that is something that I have prayed for. So you don't want to miss it. wildlyrooted.com/break free. All right. Today, we are diving into something that is also very, very close to my heart, and a different kind of conversation that we are having here on the Future Wild podcast. Now, you know that I'm all about supportive content and information for our intuitives, for our healers. This is who I serve. And I came to this topic that we're going to talk about today through a roundabout way, actually. I was starting to do more market research. I used to do this regularly, and it had been some time. And market research in the sense of like how can actually getting on conversations, real phone calls, real conversations with people that I serve or people that are part of my community and audience, and to just learn from you, find out what it is that you need, what you desire, what are your challenges and curiosities, what type of content do you want to hear about, and also what are the things that you would love to receive in terms of trainings and education and services. So I embarked on this market research journey once again this year and hopped on a bunch of calls. I've had a ton of conversations in the DMs and one-to-one personal conversations as well. And my findings really surprised me. Well, they surprised me, but also it's not surprising what I found. When it came to the number one challenge that most people talked about and their number one vision and dream and desire, what it was that they wanted, it didn't have to do with wanting to expand their intuition, gain more tools, learn more intuitive healing modalities, or any of that. It was freedom and the challenges that prevented one from experiencing the true freedom that they desired. And more specifically, money. Money. Lack of money, challenges around money, issues with money mindset, beliefs around money, just so many conversations about money. And it was interesting because, I'm talking to healers here, intuitive and spiritual healers, and there was almost this shame around it. It wasn't until we got really deep into the conversation that they would bring up, to be completely honest or to be completely transparent, or, I think what it really comes down to is money. And I think that there's this conversation around money and our relationship with money within the healing space, right? Within also the spiritual space is still taboo, is still seen as, oh, that's so materialistic. There are so many beliefs around money. And I know that I've already had some conversations on the podcast about money, and I will link 2 of them below. One we had with Linda Garcia, who is also an intuitive healer herself, and yet she is a rock star when it comes to the stock market. And one of her missions is to make it more accessible and to teach and educate the youth and future generations on building generational wealth, but through the vehicle of investments. And we also had Sarah Artemisia twice on the podcast, once talking about flower essences and plant spirits, because she has the Plant Spirit podcast. She's incredible. She is obviously an intuitive and a healer. And she is also a financial coach. And so we talked about money through the lens of her work as a financial coach with an extensive financial background and education. So these conversations are alive. And there are definitely people out there that are doing this, and I wanted to bring more of that here. And I'm going to share a little bit of my personal story in a moment. But what's so interesting is that it continues to come up time and time again. And one of the biggest things that I also hear from my clients and students who, let's say I've taken them through a mentorship or through a program like the Wildly Intuitive Practitioner Pathway, which is my signature 9-month intuitive healing program. And that is for ultimately creating your intuitive healing practice and doing deep work to discover what that is. You get trained in the Akashic records, and it's a whole journey. But at the end of that journey, so many of my students say, this was incredible, this is transformative, this is life-changing, and how do I make money now? Like, what are the next steps? What are some, who are some business coaches or business training programs or things like that you recommend? Like, that's always the next step, because we live in a world that is moved by money, right? Where we have to pay the bills. We, in our hearts, and, in our sort of higher level consciousness, we know that a world where there was true connection and collaboration and community, where we can share our services and our gifts and our offerings for free, and we'll all support each other. I mean, that is a beautiful vision, and that's not something, unless you're, in some sort of like a commune type of situation, where I definitely see that happening, or like a tight-knit community situation, or like a time exchange program. There are options out there where people are making that a reality and building parallel systems, but ultimately we still live in a world where we require money to live. And so the pathway to so-called freedom, as it pertains to the material realm, requires money. So that's one of the biggest things that came up in my market research, which, at the time I was like, okay, here I was wanting to really unearth what are some more services, more education that I can bring forth to support my people, to support the healers, and to support my audience. And then coming out of it and seeing, whoa, what they really need is a pathway to expand their financial freedom and their wealth consciousness. And that's not, I wouldn't say that's my niche. That's not my quote thing, right? But it is part of my story. And it's interesting because I immediately was like, oh, well, that's not me. I can't provide that type of stuff because that's not what I do. But then when I look at my own story and my journey, I realize that money, wealth consciousness, and working through my own shadows and like the belief work around money has absolutely been at the forefront of my life for the majority of my life. And so I think it's one of those things where you start to look at all the through lines and the webs of our lives and how things go almost unnoticed because they're so personal, they're so prevalent in your day-to-day life that it's like you can't see the obvious because you're swimming in it, right? Like the fish in water. I mean, they're surrounded by water, but do they know that the water is water, that they are swimming in water? Obviously that's a different question in terms of like your perception of their consciousness and all of that. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but you get my point. So I was starting to ask, am I just missing what's obvious? Am I here to also share and speak more about this issue? I am serving this population. This is who I am devoted to, who I love and serve, those heart-centered, wild-hearted healers and spirit-led healers and intuitives. So I prayed. I prayed for some answers. I prayed for guidance. I prayed for insights and to be led to solutions and answers for not just myself in this process and journey, but for you. And I got some answers. Ask and you shall receive in very mysterious ways. So I'll share a bit of what I received. But the first piece that I want to talk about is a little bit of my own personal story around things. I mentioned that this has been sort of through the money story piece has been a through line for me throughout my life. I have deep family, not so healthy beliefs and programmings around money and finances, runs very deep. And I realize that more and more now as an adult and as a mother, and, as many of the mothers know, your kids are reflecting back to you, right? And even in your relating and how you react, you can feel the programmings just sort of reverberate and show themselves to you. And so it's been probably over the past, I would say 10 years, over the past decade, that I've really been diving deeper and deeper into my own money story. So it begins really with my background and my family, both my parents coming from immigrant families, having moved from Puerto Rico, so Latino families, and my parents really struggling, even though both of them had full-time jobs. Actually, my mom had a full-time job and my dad had 2 full-time jobs for most of my childhood. And yet, for whatever reason, we were still considered, quote, poor. And I even remember my dad at some point, when they were still incredibly in debt, but getting to a point where, okay, like we can pay the bills and do some things, like start to do things around the house, like make changes around the house and stuff. And we were never lacking anything. I would say, like, we always had food on the table. We always had clothes on our back, right? But there were moments that I remember in my childhood, my dad said, man, when we were poor, those were some of the happiest times. Can you imagine? And saying that to kids, right? So there definitely was some gnarly programming happening there. And why, if they were working so hard and so much, why were we still struggling and drowning in debt? So there was a weight that was carried forth in my early experience, in my early childhood. And then I started to learn some of the day-to-days, like my dad teaching me how to balance a checkbook, which does anybody do that anymore? Does anybody have a checkbook? But balancing the checkbook and learning about certain things and currencies and such, which is interesting because I think Like he was so hyper focused on the financial material piece because he didn't want us to struggle in the same way. And ironically, like eventually struggling in a similar way just because of the programming. And in childhood, I also got hooked up with a performance group and started to learn how to dance and sing and became a performer. And also through that group, eventually starting to do acting and some lifestyle modeling and voiceover work as a child. So I began making my own income at a pretty young age. And also the power of residual income. So literally doing one voiceover job and then getting residuals from that, or being in a commercial and getting residuals from that if it was like a national commercial. So that's the way it would work. You would do the work, you get paid for that day. But if it was a national commercial or some sort of work like that, or print job, then you would get residuals on things. And while I didn't have too many of those, I had enough that was like, whoa, this is pretty cool, right? Like I learned early on that you actually didn't have to work so hard to get paid. But the programming was so strong in my family that it was like I couldn't hold the money. Some of it would go to help my family. And then I eventually would spend it because of these programmings around not being able to hold the money. And then I got into school and the university. I went to University of Chicago, and it's a pretty amazing school in general, it's a great school, but it's really has especially at the time, a really good economics program. And so I thought, well, I didn't know what I actually wanted to do. I chose international studies eventually as my major because you can actually apply a lot of different things toward that major. And I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I was really lost. But I did know that, if I can get some econ classes or become an econ major, maybe that'll be pretty practical. Well, I didn't become an econ major, so I couldn't actually get into a lot of the big econ classes, but I did take a couple, and I was surrounded by that kind of environment. So there was a really big contrast between some of the kids that were moving through and, had family legacies, like their parents were also graduates of U of C and in economics in some way in their careers. And so it was a completely different world, but there was like a little bits of exposure. And what I did get from it was a trip. I remember that I was invited to a trip for minorities to go to New York and to the New York Stock Exchange and to meet people in the financial realms. And for whatever reason, that sounded appealing to me. Again, it wasn't necessarily moved by anything like a specific purpose or like a passion, but there was something guiding me. And I applied and I got accepted to go on this trip and be a part of this program. And that, again, showed me, and I went to the stock market. I met some people. Of course, it was like almost all men, almost all white men. And yet get a sense of this world that was totally foreign, like the finance world. And it piqued my interest. Well, after that, I started to get into real estate. I started to work for an alternative investment firm. I think because of those little bits and interests that I had and I was able to put on my resume. And there was a connection through the University of Chicago that I was able to get this job. And I started off as an assistant and I worked my way up to marketing manager. And it was a truly boutique alternative investment firm. And I learned a ton. I wasn't the person who was in charge of the money or actually doing anything with the money, but I was basically in charge of everything else. I helped to run that business. I was the second-hand person, the right-hand person to the CEO. It was a very, very small company, very entrepreneurial. So I got to get my hands on a lot of things and a lot of projects, and getting into more of the logistical side of things as well, and spreadsheets and all of that. But I would say the biggest lessons that I took away from that experience, and by the way, I worked in that office and worked my way up the ranks over 8 years in my 20s. The whole time I was like, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? And with these internal struggles of like, I remember thinking, man, money is evil. And what am I doing here? Right? Like having that belief that money was evil, because that was kind of programmed into me, and having this like guilt and shame, but yet this intrigue. And it was such an interesting time. What it did was it definitely helped me to have a regular income. I wasn't getting paid a ton of money, but I was getting paid a regular, normal salary, I would say, for a young person. And I was able to save a lot and get my own condo at the time. And right before the bubble popped, and that was an unfortunate circumstance. And I learned a lot about money through that experience, having basically bought at the height of the market and having paid a ton for this condo and never being able to actually make my money back on that. So in true third line human design fashion, learning through failure over and over and over again. And now at this point, I don't see them as failures. I see them as experiments. But there were many things that I went through before I even hit 30 that planted these seeds for this, I would say, this desire to really shift wealth consciousness in myself and in my family because of what I was exposed to. And during my time working at that alternative investment firm, I met and was surrounded by billionaires. And once again, most of the people that I met and was surrounded by were older white men. And so I still had this sense of like, I don't belong here. Who am I to learn any of this stuff? I can't have what they have. So it was like looking through a looking glass or a window and taking a look at this world that I was never exposed to, never knew existed, being able to almost touch it and yet still feel like that's not where I belong. And it was such an interesting contrast that, again, these seeds were just sort of really fertilized by these experiences. And it got me to get curiouser and curiouser around my own personal blocks. Like, why was I always still in debt? Why couldn't I ever make more than my parents? Why did I have all of these limitations that I literally felt like I couldn't move past? And it is not for lack of knowledge or wisdom or tools and strategies, because I felt like I was doing all the quote right things and realizing, oh my gosh, it's because I'm operating according to programming that is not helping me, number one. And number two, I'm also operating within a specific paradigm. And I saw this even more clearly when I got into intuitive healing in general, right? The healing work and the healing arts, but intuitive healing especially. And what I realized was that I was trying to, quote, make a living doing things according to an old paradigm. And what we are really being called to do is to shift into the Aquarian Age with our business and with our consciousness. This is a huge missing piece that I see. There's all of these common desires as healers that we have. And it was very evident in my research. Everyone was sharing about how they wish money was irrelevant, that we could all live in harmony and share communally, right? Supporting one another and not having to worry about paying the bills, but we have to worry about paying the bills. So that's what I need. I need more money. And that, yes, we would do our work for free, but we don't have time or energy or capacity to do that because we're worried about paying the bills, about putting the food on the table and taking care of our families. Well, the way to get to those places of harmony, of being able to make our work more accessible, to be able to build community and support one another, is actually in getting the resources, aka money, in the hands of as many heart-centered, spirit-led healers as possible. I believe this is the pathway to the future and calling in the new earth. That is the way that we create a new reality, parallel systems, and co-create the new earth, is by getting more money and resources into the hands of healers. So that missing piece I was talking about, evolving with the Aquarian Age. What does this mean? Well, it means flipping the script. Flipping the script on what we think it means to be a healer and make money, and step into a new age, and not in the new age sense of, sort of like all light and love, but I'm talking about, literally a new level of consciousness, raising our consciousness around not just our healing work, but how we resource ourselves and move with the times, move with this evolutionary process that's happening, whether you like it or not. We are moving into the Aquarian Age. And what is the Aquarian Age? Well, we can look at signals from Aquarius, and that's what I want to talk about here. Ultimately, when we break it down, it's online, it's digital, so it's omnipresent, becoming omnipresent, meaning you're everywhere. You could be everywhere at once, which according to the mind is not possible and doesn't make any sense. But there are ways to do this with our work and with our presence online. This is also synarchy versus hierarchy. No more this level of, I'm higher than thou. It's about working together, but we each have our role, and everyone and every role is equally important. It's also about collaboration over competition. No more compare and despair. There's so much of that I see from my community and from my students and from clients. And I also have experienced this, and sometimes it sneakily rears its head and I'm like, whoa, that's interesting, right? Because there's still elements of that there. So collaboration over competition means we realize, we come to the full understanding that there is no competition. There's nobody we're competing against. We all are working toward the same thing, which is a more beautiful world that we know in our hearts to be true. And that we want to bring our healing work and services to the world and support the evolutionary process of the collective in the highest way. Yes, can we all agree on that? So what's required is all hands on deck and collaboration. And it's also the understanding that we each, through synarchy, we each have our role. No, there's nobody in the world like you. Nobody. And so really taking that in, this is where so much of the imposter syndrome comes from, which is why I have a whole masterclass on imposter syndrome. It's this idea of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. I am not worthy enough. Like all of that stuff that are sneaky programs that we have in our subconscious. So stepping into collaboration by owning our truth and loving it and not being afraid to show up as ourselves, our authentic selves. The Aquarian Age is also about regenerative versus reductive practices and ways of being and living. Regenerative meaning it's life affirming and life giving. This is what nature is. Nature is regenerative, right? We have a seed, we plant that seed, it gives us a sunflower. That single sunflower gives us hundreds of seeds that we can then proliferate the flowers. And this obviously the same goes for any other kind of plant, but that is the regenerative nature. That's just one tiny example of that in nature. But we are fractals of nature. We are nature. Nature is us. So this principle of regenerativity is so key. It's literally coded in our DNA and consciousness, but we have so much on top of it, so much crap, and plus the collective history, say, of reductivity, such as reductive science, trying to bring things down to one answer, or monocropping, trying to reduce things to one specific area or focus, where it eventually leads to death because it goes against nature. It goes against the regenerative nature of our world and existence. So those are elements of the Aquarian Age, and I want you to take that and think about it in terms of your work, how you show up, and business, what an Aquarian business would look like. Now let's look at some of the themes and influences and aspects connected to Aquarius itself as we move into the Aquarian Age. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. That is the traditional ruler, and the modern ruler is Uranus. These two planets have two very different feels, but they both make a lot of sense when it comes to Aquarius. With Saturn, Saturn is structure. Saturn will dismantle your false self. Saturn compels you to do the challenging work of releasing attachments and limiting self-identities that are detrimental, but also very hard to get over. But Saturn helps you because Saturn is a hard ass, right? And Saturn helps you to remember where you came from, ultimately, which is source. Uranus is the shaker upper, right? Uranus is bringing that thunder. It's bringing the shakeup that is needed, the surprise, explosive shifts and combustions and all of that that are required for us to literally shake us out of an old paradigm that is not working. Because sometimes we need to be shaken out of it. Aquarius is the sign that is all about the good of the whole. Aquarius sees how heaven can be brought to earth, how heaven can be formed on earth. Aquarius sees all sides. Aquarius acknowledges and considers all the sides, perspectives, and information, thinking outside of the box and connecting the dots to do so. Aquarius is also about selfless service, but also scrutiny. Aquarius wants to make sure that we are doing everything that we possibly can that is absolutely good and true and will be good and true for everyone. Aquarius is also all about technology and science and sort of like all the pieces of the information in that way. So when we're looking at it in terms of our age and the world that we're moving in, we already in and we're moving even more in, it's digital. Digital, whether we like it or not, we are going even more digital. So I think it's really important that we prepare ourselves for that, and not just prepare, but embrace it in a way that actually feels good and empowering versus feeling like, oh my God, that's not where I want to go. Believe me, I have those feelings inside of me of just wanting to blow everything up and go out into nature and in the wild, right? Off grid, which I'm not even saying that I won't do that, but we still have to stay interconnected in some way. And this is the reality that we have. So why not actually get into good terms with the digital age and world and make it work for us? Ultimately, Aquarius is the water bearer. So a lot of people mistake Aquarius for being a water sign, but Aquarius is actually an air sign. And the water bearer, that is the symbol of Aquarius, collects and redistributes the water and pours it back to Earth. So literally collecting and redistributing life-giving resources, spirit consciousness. Aquarius is classified as an air sign along with Gemini and Libra, and air signs are typically associated with intellectual pursuits, communication, and social interactions. The water bearer symbol of Aquarius comes from the mythological story of a handsome prince in Greek mythology. I think it's pronounced Ganymede, who was carried off to Mount Olympus by Zeus, and he was to become the cupbearer to the gods. The water that he carries represents knowledge, communication, the sharing of ideas. These are all qualities associated with the air element. So while Aquarius is symbolized by the water bearer, it is considered to have those air sign qualities in astrology due to those associations. What's interesting here is that Aquarius is considered emotionally detached. There's an emotional detachment from this work and duty of the redistribution of the water. And yet water represents emotions, right? Water represents spirit, spiritual knowledge. So remember, Aquarius holds the water within a container, within a vessel, and doesn't get their hands wet. Water representing spiritual knowledge, Aquarius functions to fill that container with spiritual knowledge, and once it is full, share it by tipping it out amongst humanity. And then Aquarius, in the Aquarian way, dutifully goes about refilling the container again in order to tip it out again once it is full. So this is sort of the analytical and devotional piece of Aquarius to the collective. Now remember, Aquarius season comes right before Pisces, the final sign of the astrological wheel, Pisces being water, very deeply connected to spirituality, intuition, and emotions. So literally Aquarius being the water bearer to Pisces. Aquarius loves the world. When we see Aquarius represented in the tarot, it's the star card. And the star card is arguably the most healing card in the deck because it is about the healing of the collective. And from their fully opened heart, the Aquarian love becomes the waters of life poured forth for thirsty humanity. The waters of life poured forth for thirsty humanity. So all of humanity's thirsts, seeking the waters leading to the path of return. Aquarius gets this, and Aquarius serves. Aquarius is in service to the collective. Okay, Vanessa, so what does all of this have to do with breaking free from the broke healer paradigm? You're already like over 40 minutes into this episode, and we haven't explicitly touched on that. And that's because we need this context. We need to understand where we are, where we're coming from, what we're facing, so what we have to work with in terms of the current societal status, our situations, and also internally, our subconscious and our energetic situations, context, and programmings, and what we are moving into, right? So this Aquarian age and paradigm. So no more can we operate under this broke healer paradigm. The broke healer paradigm being, as a healer, we are not supposed to make money. As a healer, we're supposed to be super humble and have nothing. As a healer, we're supposed to give all of ourselves to the detriment of ourselves. That is a story that no longer fits in the Aquarian age. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding around the teachings of some spiritual teachers. And even when we look at Jesus, Yeshua, there is a difference between not being attached and governed by and ruled over by materiality. Okay? So not having false idols in the sense of idolizing materialism, idolizing wealth and money, idolizing having, that car or that house or getting to travel and all of that stuff. It's not to say that you can't desire those things, but to be a slave to them is what was taught against. There's a difference between being well-resourced and being a conduit and a conscious conduit and steward of money, and being attached to money and idolizing it. There's a big difference. And in this Aquarian age, in order to bring more equanimity, in order to bring more harmony, in order to create a system where resources are distributed fairly and generously, in order to create regenerative societies. So all of those are part of the Aquarian age. We have to redefine our role and our relationship with money. And we have to work on up-leveling our own wealth consciousness, which means there's a lot of work in terms of subconscious programming and getting into energetic alignment, clearing our fields, all of those good things, raising our consciousness and taking aligned, spirit-led, inspired action that supports that vision of the new earth in our hearts, that we hold in our hearts. Where do we begin? How do we start? How the F do we do this, right? Well, the first place obviously is yourself, really taking a hard and honest look at your relationship with money, your relationship with wealth and finances, your relationship with yourself as it pertains to worthiness and how you're showing up for yourself, looking at these programs that we're holding. And if you want to know what programs are running, you look at your life. You look at the results, the outcomes of your current life situation. And that will tell you what areas of your life you might want to dig deeper around. Now, you might stop me right there and say, well, Vanessa, are you saying that literally everything that's ever happened to me, all of the traumas, the horrific events that are happening throughout the world, the atrocities, etc., are, quote, due to my programming or my fault? And to that, I would say, of course not. There are things that are at play that are beyond our control, that are also a part of a larger cosmic movement that we are a part of. And so our lives are a mix of, you could say, co-creation, right? Your participation in it, and fate, the cosmic dream, the collective journey. There are many moving parts. So while there are cases where prior to incarnation, you had some agency in choosing aspects of your life, but I like to see it kind of like a NASA mission where you say yes to a particular life, you plan it as much as possible or that you are able with your spiritual team. And then you also have cards that you are dealt that you have to work with. And then you go off into space. And there's a whole bunch of other variables that could not have been taken into account. And you're literally entering realms that are out of your control. So I want to be very clear that you still have agency in a lot of aspects of your life, and a lot of what you see in your life on a day-to-day basis is also very much contributed by your programming, your subconscious, and beliefs that you're not even aware are running. So we have to be careful that we don't go into victim consciousness, right? And that we don't have any agency. And we also don't want to go to the other extreme and say everything is your fault and everything that's happening in your life is because of programmings that are running, right? So there's nuance here. And I really urge you to tune in and be really honest with yourself. Take a look at your life and be really honest about what are the things that you have an inkling are due to something that is running under the surface, through your subconscious, through your energetic streams, that you actually have the power to shift. Because once you realize that, and you start taking steps toward shifting that and bringing to light what is actually held in the unseen realms and in the subconscious, it is literally life-changing and it's totally empowering. That's the first place to start. The second, I would say, is your intuitive connection. Really honing your intuitive channel, because your high self, your guides, your angels are always communicating. They're always wanting to guide you in the highest way. And so the more that you can clean up and clear up your intuitive channels, the more that you're going to be able to receive the messages, receive the guidance that you are praying for, that you are crying for. And the third piece, and this is the piece that I was hearing from all of the people that I was interviewing and having conversations around, this piece of money, the revenue, the support financially, being resourced. This will come with an Aquarian business strategy, okay? Aquarian Age business, which means digital, passive revenue, regenerative income sources, and regenerative practices. So putting things out there, products and services and your work that can actually be seeds that are planted and grow more and proliferate. That's what makes it accessible. That's what makes you have impact. So to expand your impact, expand your revenue, expand your time, we have to begin to implement Aquarian business strategies. And I told you earlier that my prayers for that were answered. And that is because I received not only downloads, intuitive downloads about specific steps and mind shifting techniques and all of the stuff that are actually going into a program, and you will be the first to hear about it. But I also was given a one-stop shop solution for my busy, overwhelmed, time-drained, money-drained healers so that you can share your gifts with more ease and receive more abundantly for your healing work and services, and make your healing work more accessible to the masses. I'm going to be sharing all about it in my upcoming masterclass, The Flow and Freedom Formula, breaking free from the broke healer paradigm. This is part of the revolution into the Aquarian Age. We need money and resources to go into the hands of heart-centered, spirit-led healers so that you move from struggling, drained, and overwhelmed to fully expanding not only your wealth, but your time, your energy, and most importantly, your impact. So join me on the new moon, Gemini new moon, June 6th. If you cannot make it live, there will be a replay. If you are tuning into this from the future, hello, there is a replay available for you. I highly recommend you sign up regardless of whether you can make it live or not. You'll receive the replay, and we're going to dive deep into specific requirements and strategies for this Aquarian new age as it pertains to business as a healer and breaking out of this broke healer paradigm. You're going to walk away with tangible and practical steps to implement right away. And I'll be talking about a solution that I literally prayed for. I prayed for this so that you have all of the necessary foundational training and knowledge to get started building your Aquarian business and start shifting your wealth reality right away. So let's get you resourced and claim your natural prosperity. Because remember, prosperity is in nature, regeneration and prosperity. It's already in you, and it's time to flourish and make it happen so we can all come together and be empowered stewards for a healing world. You can go to wildlyrooted.com/break free, one word. And of course, all links are in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you how this is landing, your thoughts, your challenges when it comes to this topic of the broke healer paradigm. Let's keep this conversation going, and I cannot wait to see you inside that masterclass. Go sign up today right now and let me know over on Instagram. I'm at wildlyrooted. Until next week, sending you all my love. Be well.